All right, Shabbos, say good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning. Sure to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Elul. Shin Din Avram Kalman for dedicating all the Sherman Drushos this month in honor of Yechil's engagement to Alana Falik and in memory of their parents, Jerome and Bernice Kalman and Alexander and Frederica David. We thank Barak, Maya, Sandy Hoffman, Dora Limas, and Avi Malamed for dedicating all the Sherman Drushos this month in memory of Ruvain ben Emmanuel, Ayal and Sarah Steinberg for dedicating the Shiurim this month in the Source of Refuah Shlema for Shulamis Bas Susha, and Daf Yomi Shir for dedicating the Shiurim this month in the Source of Refuah Shlema for Yehuda ben Michal. With that, let us begin. We thank all of our sponsors for their incredible generosity. We have a lot to do today. Baruch Hashem, today's Daf is Samech Ches 69. We left off on Samech Ches Amud Beis 68b, right across from Tosfos Vaha. So pretty much right in the center of the daf. So if you remember again, we ended off yesterday with a very interesting machlokes. We had a brisa. The brisa recorded a machlokes in Rebbe and Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Namely, again, at what point in time does a girl or does a woman lose her rights in Mizonos and in dowry? So Rebbe said that halacha l'maisa, ultimately, again, when a girl becomes a bogeres, or when she gets married, she loses her mizonos. But ultimately, again, she never loses her entitlement to dowry. Rabbi Shimon Elazar, however, holds that halacha l'maisa, either when a girl becomes a bogeres or when she gets married, she loses both Parnasso and Mizonos. The Gemara tried to bring a raya against Rebbe from our Mishnah, and the Gemara explained ultimately it's not a contradiction. According to Rebbe, while it's true that a girl who goes ahead and becomes a bogeres doesn't go ahead and doesn't lose mizonos or dowry, if she gets married as a ketana, remember that was the case of our Mishnah, the mother or the brother are marrying her off as a ketana. If she got married off with a lower amount of a dowry, she could go back and reclaim that higher amount as long as what? She objected at the time of the marriage. That's where we left off. So Gemara says, I should have read another two lines. Hakanai Mistabra, this is also true. The Imkain Kashi the Rebbe ad Rebbe. As otherwise there'd be a contradiction about from Rebbe on Rebbe. How so? The Sanya. Rebbe Omer, Habas Nizones Mina Achin Noteles Isur Nichasim. If a daughter is supported by her brothers. Now when we say, remember again, daughter supported by her brothers means what? The fathers died. The brothers have inherited the estate, and ultimately, again, the daughter is supported from that estate. So the Gemara says, if so, in a situation like that, she receives 1/10 of the estate for her dowry. Remember again, 1/10 is like the default amount for dowry. So the Gemara says, but 1 second. Nizonis in, Sheina Nizonis lo. This sounds like she only gets dowry when she gets mizonos. But once mizonos ends, i.e. at bagros, so dowry ends as well. Elav shmamina, had machai hadlo machai shmamina. Rather, you can see over here, no. Even in a case of marriage, technically speaking, she would be entitled to dowry as long as what? As long as at the time of the marriage, if she received a lower amount, she lodged a complaint. Good. Amrli Ravina the Rava. Amrli Ravada Barava Mishmeich. So listen to this. Ravina said to Rava, Ravada Barava said to us in your name, Bagra ina tzricha limchos. Nises ina tzricha limchos. Bagra v'nises tzricha limchos. So an interesting statement over here. If a girl becomes a bogeres, she does not have to make a macha. She doesn't have to lodge a complaint in order to retain her dowry. Similarly again, Bagra v'nises, if she went ahead and became bogeres and got married, she doesn't have to lodge a complaint in order to go ahead and keep her. Bagra v'nises tzricha limchos. However, if she became a bogeres and got married, she does have to lodge a complaint to keep her dowry. So the Gemara says, Miyama Rav Hachi, did Rav actually say this? Va'isi Rav Nachman, Rav Reiz Kasha Rav Nachman, Yisoma, Vishani la Hadamachi Hadalamachi. I will say again, this is what we brought up before. We brought up the case of Yisoma, and the way we resolved that seeming contradiction is to say one was the case where she lodged a complaint, one was the case she didn't lodge a complaint, to which the Gemara says, Lokashya, Interesting distinction. One is one is talking about a case where she is receiving mizonos from her brothers, i.e., from the estate, and one is where she is not receiving mizonos from the estate. Okay, Amrafuna Amrava. So Amrabi, sorry. Parnasso in a kitnai Kesuvos. So both say an interesting case here, or an interesting statement. So Rav Huna says the name of Rebbe. Parnasso, remember again, Parnasso means dowry. Dowry is not a Tanai Kesuva. It's not part of the Tanai Kesuva. So we'll say, so what does that mean that Parnasso is not part of the Tanai Kesuva? So remember again, let's take a step back for just a moment. Look at Rashi. It's almost right across. Parnasso, Nidunya, dowry, Tanai Kesuva, Mizonos, Shalbas. Shabbos, remember again, in the realm of Tanai Kesuva, there are a number of different things that are Tanai Kesuva. Right? These are stipulations that are part of the Kesuva. What's the most popular or the most well-known Tanai Kesuva? Mizonos. Right? Mizonos, that's where a man says, again, that his daughters are going to be supported by him and by his estate. That's a Tanai Kesuva. So comes along Rebbe, Rav Huna says the name of Rebbe, Parnasso or Nedunya is not one of the Tanai Kesuva. So the Gemara says, "My ina Tanai Kesuva." What is that? What's the meaning of that statement? Inema di ilu Parnasso tarfa mimishibadi utanai Kesuva lo tarfa mishibadi. If you want to say that ultimately that it means that Parnasso, dowry, is collectible from encumbered properties, right? And ultimately, Tanai Kesuva are not collectible from encumbered properties. In other words, they both say, so maybe that's what it's saying. That halacha l'maisa, maybe dowry. Let's take a step back. Mizonos, you can collect from a shubadam. So just give you an example of this, right? Ruvain dies. He leaves behind his estate to his kids. Let's say over the course of his lifetime, he sold off properties. So now remember again, Tanai Kesuva is that when a man dies, his daughter is supported from the estate. Let's say now there's no properties in the estate anymore. The daughter doesn't have the right to claw back those properties that her father sold during his lifetime in order to provide for Mizonos. That's what it means that Mizonos is not collected from Mishubadi. So maybe when we say that ultimately, again, Parnasso, meaning Nedunya, dowry, is not like Tanai Kesuva, maybe there is a clawback for dowry. Is that what it means? To which the Gemara says, if that's the case, by Kamash Malon, Hamaisim B'chol Yom, Motzin La Parnasso, Ve'ena Motzin La Mizonos. So we'll say, so the truth is that we actually already know. We'll discuss this. We'll discuss this, that halacha l'maisa, there is a clawback for dowry, not a clawback for Parnasso. So that would be obvious, even though we haven't seen that yet, but that'd be obvious. To which the Gemara says, Ve'elo, Dilu Parnasso gavya nami mimetaltali, utnai Kesuva mimakarkoi gavya mimetaltali lo gavya. So we'll say, so maybe the other possibility is like this, that ultimately, Parnasso is collectible even from metaltalin. Not only is dowry collectible from karka, but it's also collectible from metaltalin, right? And on the other hand, Tanai Kesuva is only collectible from karka, not from metaltalin. Maybe that's the distinction. To which the Gemara says, "L'Rebbe, idi migva gadya." Well, that's not true because according to Rebbe, both Parnasso and both Parnasso and both Mizonos are both collectible from metaltalin as well as karka. Disanya, echa nechasim sheish l'nachrayis, ve'echa nechasim shein l'nachrayis, motzin l'mazon ha'isha, u'lebanos divrei Rebbe. Shabbos says, so ultimately Rebbe says explicitly in the Brisa, both of us, remember again, nechasim sheish l'nachrayis means karka, land, real estate. Nechasim shein l'nachrayis is metaltalin. Both of those items are used to satisfy motzin l'mazon ha'isha u'lebanos, is used ultimately again to support a wife and daughters. Direi Rebbe, ve'ela mai Parnasso eino k'tanai Kesuva. So remember again, we're just trying to figure out the meaning of a simple statement, right? Brisa made a statement that Parnasso dowry is not treated like Tanai Kesuva. We're just trying to figure out what does that statement mean. Rather, the Gemara says, here's what it means. Lechidisanya, ha'omer ayazonu b'nosav min chasav ein shomalo. Listen to this. Let's say a man says I do not want my daughter to be supported from my property. He makes that statement. I don't want my daughter to be supported from my property. What's the halacha? Ein shomen lo. Ein shomen lo. We don't listen to him. The Rebbe said, why don't we listen to? Look at Rashi. Look at Rashi. 3 lines up from the bottom. Very simple. Because a man has obligation. When a man signs a ksuva with his wife, a man doesn't sign a ksuva. When a man enters into a ksuva with his wife, part of the tinoi ksuva is that what? He has to support his daughters. He doesn't have a right to say, I'm not doing that. On the other hand, if a man says, Parnasso b'nosav minachasav, shomalo. If a man says, I'm not giving my daughters a dowry, ultimately, under those circumstances, we listen to him. Look at Rashi. Al yisparnasu shomelo, shaparnasa eno chov alav kitnai ksuva, elechov al hayisomim, heicha delot tziva ha'av shalo lefarnasam. So we'll say, so interesting, the Gemara suggests, maybe this is the distinction. If a man says, I'm not giving my daughters Mizonos, we don't listen to him. But if a man says, I'm not giving my daughters dowry, we listen to him. Shaparnasa eno kitinai ksuva. Top of Samechtes. So tala le Rav le Rebbe. So Rabbi says very interesting expression. Tala le Rav le Rebbe bene chiti or bene chati. So Rav, look, if you look at Rashi, it's actually interesting. The expression here is as follows: Shalach lo igeres shlomim v'tala she'ela zu ben hashitim. So I'll say, so sometimes, I guess the way it's worked is, you would write a letter to someone. The primary point of the letter was a correspondence just of like shalom, just to correspond with each other. And in the middle of the letter, what would happen? You would go ahead and put a question. So the expression that was used is you put a question in between the lines of the letter. So that's what it means over here. Tala le Rav le Rebbe bene chati. Rav suspended a question to Rebbe in between the lines of the letter. What was the line? What was the question? So therefore, I just want to point out over here. So what we have, we just resolved this last piece, was there's a fundamental distinction between Parnasso and Mizonos. What's the fundamental distinction? Mizonos t'nai ksuva, Parnasso not t'nai ksuva. How does that play out? Technically speaking, if a man says, I'm not supporting my daughters, I'm not giving my daughters Mizonos, such a statement is void because that is inherently built into the ksuva. But technically speaking, if a man says, I'm not giving my daughters a dowry, technically speaking, we listen to him. Okay, so now let's go back there. Ha'achin sheshibdu mahu. So here's an interesting case. Let's say, so now father died, brothers inherit the estate. Part of what now the brothers have an obligation to do from the estate, number one, is to give their sister or sisters mizonos and dowry. What happens if the brothers encumbered the estate? So the Gemara says, Yosef Rabbi Chia Kamei Amrle Machru Amishkenu. So both say, so now watch this. So this was the question that Rav sent to Rebbe. If the brothers went ahead and encumbered the estate, so what rights do the daughters now have? So both say, so now Rebbe got this question, and Rabbi Chia was sitting there with Rebbe when Rebbe received the question. And he asked him, Amrle, here's the problem, both say, so what does it mean they encumbered the estate? Amrle, Machru Amishkenu. Does it mean they sold property of the estate? Or maybe they pledged property? In other words, what are we talking about? Amrle Mai Nafkamina, Be Machru Be Mishkenu. What's the difference whether or not they sold it or they just encumbered it? So to which the Gemara says, here's the difference. Bosin le Parnassa, Vemosin le Mizonos. That this is what we mentioned before. We will extract property, encumbered property, sold property, to satisfy the dowry obligation, but we will not go ahead and extract property in order to go ahead and satisfy the Mizonos obligation. So that is a fundamental distinction of Rav. So we'll say, so that's why they weren't sure what was he referring to. So what was Rav referring to? Rav, im machru kami baile, nichtav le machru. Im mishkenu kami baile, nichtav le mishkenu. So now the kasha goes back on Rav, why don't you explicitly state what your question is? In other words, what are you asking? Are you asking about a case where the brothers sold or the brothers encumbered? And whatever you're asking, why don't you explicitly write it in the letter? To which the Gemara will say, interestingly enough, Rav, Tarvayu Kami Baile. Rav was actually inquiring about both of these things. He was asking both about selling and encumbering v'savar. And here was his issue. He said as follows: Ikasivna le machru hanech. So we'll say, if Rav said like this: if I just go ahead and write about a case where the brothers sold off the property of the estate, and I just write that question, hanecha ishalach li demotziin kol shekei mishkanu. If the response back is that you could extract property from a sale in order to satisfy dowry obligations, ultimately, again, if you could extract it from a sale, you could certainly extract it, so to speak, from an encumbrance. Kol shekei mishkanu. Ishalach li ein motziin. But if they send back to me that we do not extract it from a purchaser, Kati Mishkinu Kami Boili, that won't answer my question regarding someone who pledged the property. Mishkinu, and if I write about the case of a pledged property, so Ishalachli De'in Motziin, if they tell me you can't extract it, Kol Shekein Machru, all the more so you can't extract it in the case of a sale. Ishalachli Motziin, but if they said to me you can extract it, Akati machru kami bayali. I would still be left with the question about the case of a sale. Therefore, ichtov le shibdu demashma hachi vahachi. Therefore, I will say, interestingly enough, Rav intentionally wrote an ambiguous lashon, which forced them then to answer him on both accounts. So therefore, I will say, what I want to point out what's happened over here is as follows. This is a dramatic halacha. So what the Gemara just said is like this: father dies, leaves behind the estate. Brothers go ahead and either encumber or sell off property. What the Gemara teaches us is that halacha l'maisa, the daughters have the right to go back and extract properties for the sake of their dowry, but not for the sake of Mizonos. So essentially, the Mizonos obligation is satisfied with the daughters as long as the estate has property. Unsold, unencumbered property. But halacha for dowry, they could actually go back and reclaim or claw back properties in order to satisfy the dowry obligation. Quite amazing. Rabbi Yochanan says as follows: Echad zeh in motziin. Rabbi Yochanan disagrees. And he says dowry is no different than Mizonos. Just like from Mizonos, you can't take anything back. So to halacha l'maisa for dowry, you can't take anything back as well. Good. So we'll say Ibailahu, Rabbi Yochanan. So we'll say, so now we have a machlokas, Rabbi Yochanan and Rebbe. Right? Rebbe says, here's what everyone agrees with. Everyone agrees, Mizonos, if the property is sold or encumbered, daughters can't take it back. Dowry, Rebbe says they can take it back. Rabbi Yochanan says they can't take it back. So here's the shaila. Ibailahu, Rabbi Yochanan, lo shmiya lehad Rebbe. V'yishmiya they have a mekabelei. Odilmo shmiya v'lo mekabelei. So what's the kasha? Rabbi Yochanan. Did Rabbi Yochanan hear what Rebbe said? In other words, what's the pshat? Did he hear the ruling of Rebbe, and nevertheless he still has his oppositional position, or he just never heard the position of Rebbe? But had he heard the position of Rebbe, he certainly would have gotten in line with Rebbe. So that's the shaila. To which the Gemara says, Tashma de itmar mishemes v'yaniach shnei banos uben. A man dies and he left behind 2 daughters and a son. The kadma harishona v'natla yisra nechasim v'lo ispika shein shnia ligbos ad shemes haben. Shabbos say this is a really interesting case. Father dies, leaves behind 2 daughters and a son. Okay, now after the death of the father, daughter number 1 goes ahead and gets married. Now, both say, remember again, so what's the default amount for Kesuva? Default amount? 10th of the estate. So daughter number 1 goes in and gets married, takes her 10th of the estate. Good. Mazel tov. Beautiful. Next, brother dies. Now, brother dies before sister number 2 gets married. Now, both say, what happens when brother dies? So remember again, if there are no sons, right, who inherits the estate? The girls. So now, sister number 1, sister number 2, now co-inherit the estate. How do they split the estate? How do sisters split an estate? 50-50. Now watch this. So now, Rabbi Yochanan Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Shnia Vitra. Now say, listen to how fascinating the shaila is. So now we have a Yerusha question. Do we say that maybe sister number 2 should set aside her 10th that would represent her dowry amount before they divide the estate? Or do we say no? Divide the estate 50-50, and now sister number 2, she doesn't get an additional tenth. In other words, she'll just take her dowry portion from her portion of the estate. That's the interesting Yerusha Shaila. So Rabbi Yochanan, Shnia Vitra, the second sister has been mevater. The second sister has essentially yielded her dowry amount. I will say, when we say she yielded, remember, no one's asking her. What the halacha says is, listen, you just inherited 50% of the estate. That's it. In other words, that's your dowry. There's no 10th allocation anymore. You just inherited 50%. Am Rabbi Chanina, Gidol Mizamru. So I will say, look at Rashi for just a moment. Vitra, Isra Nechasim, V'lo Amrinan Titel Isra Nechasim Tchila, Kimo Shenat Lazu, V'yachar Kach Yachloku, Elazu Shekin Mavnise Zachsa, Ubas Alabas, Ein Lo Isra Nechasim Sharishte and Shavas Birusha. So I will say, so here's what's interesting. It turns out that sister number 1 will actually walk away with more of the estate. Right? Why does sister number 1 walk away with more of the estate? Because remember, she got her initial 10th of dowry, and now she's inheriting 50% of what was left over afterwards. So the Gemara says, the truth is, we've said something even bigger than this. We go ahead and we extract from purchasers for Parnasso, for dowry, and not from Mizonos. The At Amrit Shnia Vitra. So Rabbi Chanina says that's interesting, because if we're going to say that halacha l'maisa, you can go ahead and claw back property in order to go ahead and pay for dowry, so shouldn't sister number 2 be able to allocate her 10th first before the estate is divided up? V'misa nemale man amra. So we're saying, if this was true, ultimately again, v'misa nemale man amra v'dilmali olam lo shmiale. Maybe Rabbi Yochanan never heard the position of Rabbi. V'chi shmiale kabil, and maybe when he heard it, ultimately again he accepted it. The shiny hasam diika revach beisa. Maybe this case is different, I will say. Why is this case different? Because since at the end of the day, sister number 2 is inheriting a large amount of property, it doesn't make sense to say that we should first go ahead and give her her 10th and then go ahead and divide up the estate. Well, if that's the case, I'm going to Rav Ashi will say, first white line, Elmiata, Ashki chametzia ba'alma diika revach beisa. So we'll say, if that's the case, maybe what about the following situation? We'll say, let's say similar case, or it doesn't have to be this case of where the brother died, but let's say again a girl has not yet gotten her dowry, and let's say the father sold off, or let's say the brother sold off the estate. Now what happens? The daughter finds $1 million in the street, a bag of money. I will say a bag of money. There's no simanim; it's all hers. So would we say now that she has profit, now that she has money, ultimately, again, she's not entitled to any kind of clawback from the estate? To which the Gemara says, no, that's not a fair comparison. Amarle, Ana, Rav Chabesa Mehani Nechasim Ka'amina. See, Rabbi said, just to point out, he's saying it's different in this case, because in this case, they were just describing, she inherited 50% of her father's estate. So it could be that in that kind of case, where she, remember again, Rabbi say, what's the whole point of the dowry? The whole point of the dowry is to give a daughter a chilik in her father's estate. In this case over here, where the brother dies and sister number 2 has not yet gotten married, does she own a significant part of her father's estate? Absolutely. And that could be where Rabbi Yochanan would say that halacha l'maisa, there's no need to first allocate a 10th before you go ahead and you give her 50%. The dowry is absorbed. The whole thing is a dowry. So I remember again, the entire 50% that she's now inherited now effectively becomes her parnasa. So we'll say, I just mentioned over here, how do we paskin? How do we paskin in this case? Because we'll say, this actually is very interesting. So what do we do in a case where father died, brother inherits the estate, and let's say brother or brothers sold off the entire estate. So now there are sisters. The sisters now are effectively left without what? Number one, they're left without Mizonos and Parnasso and dowry. So what do we do? So the Rambam paskins in Hilchos Ishus, Parak Chaf Halacha Zayin, Ha'achim Shemachru O Mishkinu Karka Aviem, Habas Torefes Min Halakuchos Parnassasa, Kiderech Shetarfin Kol Ba'alei Chovos Min Halakuchos, Kimoshis Bar Hilchos Hava. They both say there is a clawback for dowry. There's a clawback for dowry. we're going to see, I will say this, all of these sugyas we're going to do today are all linked together. What we're going to effectively see, remember, what did we just say before in the first part of today's daf, is there's a distinction between, or we should said that a dowry is not t'nai ksuva. Is not t'nai ksuva. So I will say, remember again, how does that manifest itself? That ultimately, again, so Parnasso dowry is not t'nai ksuva. That, now, we gave a number of different examples of it, but one of the examples was that for t'nai ksuva, you can't collect from mishubadim. In other words, if the brothers sold off the property of the estate, you have no recourse for t'nai ksuva. So, for example, for Mizonos, ultimately, again, if the brothers sold off the estate, the girls can't go back and reclaim sold property. For dowry, they can. For that, and that is the halacha l'maisa. So now here we go. Halacha l'maisa number 1: brothers sold off the property of the estate. Daughters are getting married. There's no dowry. What could they do? They could claw back sold properties. I will say the reason for that is going to become apparent in the next sugya, where I'm going to spoil it a little bit, but we'll do it inside afterwards. That's really because when it comes to dowry, the daughters are considered to be like creditors. And that's what the Rambam says over here. He says, Kiderach shetarfin kol ba'alei chovos. A daughter is a creditor when it comes to her dowry, but she is not a creditor when it comes to her mizonos. And this goes back to what we said before. Mizonos is an entitlement, right? It's an entitlement that falls under the umbrella of t'nai ksuva. So on one hand, here's the beauty of it. Because it's t'nai ksuva, it's an entitlement, it's yours, but you're not a creditor, or at least you're not a first position creditor. Dowry, that makes her like a creditor. A creditor has clawback rights. Entitlement does not. So watch, this leads into the next sugya. Here we go. Amra Meimar. So Meimar says, Bas Yoreshes Havya. A daughter is considered to be like an inheritor. So now we're focusing specifically on the rights to Parnasso, to dowry. When it comes to her dowry right, she is treated like an inheritor. If you look at Rashi, Yoreshes Havya. The rights to dowry are like inheritance. Is that true? Is that really true? I will say, so, by the way, what's the difference between being a creditor and an inheritor? So I will say, watch this case. Let's say father dies. So now again he leaves behind 2 sons and 2 daughters. So the sons go over to the daughters and they say, look, here's what we want to do. We want to buy you out. Right? Okay, for dowry, you're entitled to 1/10 of the estate. So here's the cash value of 1/10 of the estate. Can they force that buyout? So Rabbi Meimar says, well, if she is a Yoreshes, if she's an inheritor, you can't force a buyout. Why not? Because an inheritor owns a piece of every part of the estate. Right? Rabbi say that's how Yerusha works. In general, Yerusha, the way it works is when a father dies, all the children who inherit own a little piece of everything. Their ownership interests are intermingled on every piece of the estate until a formal division is affected. So therefore, if the daughter is a Yoreshes, the brothers cannot force a buyout. Similarly again, if they want to give the daughter, brothers want to say, here's a piece of property, this is payment for your Parnasso, they cannot force that. Amar le'in, Ravashi Amar, Bas Palas Chovur. Ravashi argues, Ravashi says, no. A daughter is not an inheritor when it comes to her Parnasso, when it comes to her dowry. Rather, what is she? She's a creditor. Then Rabbi we're going to see there are pros and cons to both. Va'af Ameimar Hadrabe. Rabbi even Ameimar retracted his position, and Ameimar said, you're right. A daughter is really a creditor. She's not an inheritor when it comes to her dowry. The Amrav Min Yumi, Braid Rab Min Yumi, the Amrav Min Yumi, Braid Rab Min Yumi, Berei Derat Nechumi, Hava Ka'ibna Kamei Da Ameimar. I was once standing in front of Ameimar, Va'asei Hai Isisale Kamei. So Rabbi saying a girl came before, a woman came before him. And this girl, this woman, wanted 1/10 of the estate. Her father passed away. She came up with her brothers. She wanted 1/10 of the estate of her father for her dowry. And ultimately, again, he saw, by the way, that this girl was open to a buyout. She was open to a buyout. That had the brothers given her the cash value of the 1/10 of the estate, she would have accepted it. Because ultimately he heard the brothers saying, if we had the money, we would buy you out. And ultimately, Amemar heard this and he didn't say anything. Now, both sides. So remember again, Amemar originally said that a daughter is an inheritor. So both say, remember, if you're an inheritor, could the daughter be bought out with the cash value of her 1/10 portion? No, right? Because an inheritor can't be bought out. An inheritor requires a chalukah, requires a division, because an inheritor owns a little piece of everything. Now here, Amemar's coming along and he hears the brother saying to the daughter, if we had, to their sister, if we had money, we would buy you out. And Amemar didn't object to this. The fact that Amemar didn't object to this seems to indicate to us what? That he changed his position. He changed his position and said that, a payout is permitted. Now, both say, the only way a payout is permitted is how? If you hold that the sister is a creditor and not an inheritor. Now, both say, now that it seems to be everyone agrees that a sister is considered to be a creditor when it comes to a dowry portion. So the Gemara says, I'm sorry, listen to this. Da'aba o da'achi. Fascinating. Is she a creditor ultimately again of the father, or is she a creditor of her brothers? Watch this. So the Gemara says, what is that? So I said, just before we go on, I just want to stop because we just reached a very important milestone. Again, I ruined it for you a little bit by telling you the Rambam before, but now this is all beginning to kind of coalesce, all beginning to gel a little bit. A girl is considered to be a creditor in the estate when it comes to her dowry portion, right? Which means what? Number one, what does it mean? So first of all, I'll say what it means is it's not Tanai Ksuva. That's number one. That was number one. It's not Tanai Ksuva. Because we'll say Tanai Ksuva is saying it's written. So for example, Mizonos. A girl is not considered to be a creditor with her Mizonos. It's an entitlement, but she's not a creditor. So number one, that's what it means when we say that ultimately, again, dowry is not Tanai Ksuva. It means that it's not an entitlement. She's a creditor. That's number one. Number two, what does creditor mean? If the brothers sold off all of the property of the estate, halacha l'maisa, what right does the daughter have? Clawback. Clawback. She has the right to go and collect those properties. Why? Halacha l'maisa, because she is a creditor. Now, next piece. Whose creditor is she? Is she the creditor of the brothers? Is she the creditor of the father? So this is fascinating. Listen to this. L'may nafkamina. Listen to this, we'll say. So l'may nafkamina. L'migba l'beinon shelo b'shvua v'ziburis b'shvua. Okay, here we go. We'll say. Here's the difference. If she is a creditor of the father, then ultimately, again, a creditor generally is entitled to beinonis, right? Is entitled to middle grade property. We'll say, right in the world of real estate, there's three categories: idis, beinonis, and ziburis. Idis, highest quality; beinonis, middle quality; ziburis, inferior quality. If she's a creditor of the father, then ultimately, again, she is entitled to beinonis, middle grade property, and she doesn't have to take a shavua, right? If, however, again, she is a creditor of the brothers, suppose here's the difference. Actually, take a look at Rashi. Let's see it inside. Look at Rashi. Rashi says, I'm sorry, I said it wrong. If she's a creditor of the father, listen to this. If she's a creditor of the father, then ultimately, again, she only collects from ziburis, and she only collects with a shvua. Because say, if she's a creditor of the father, so remember again, the father is dead. So if she's a creditor of the father, then essentially what's happening? She's collecting from nichsei yisomim, right? Property of yisomim. The Rebbe say there's a takana. Whenever you're collecting from nichsei yisomim, number one, you only get ziburis, inferior grade. Number two, you could only collect with a shvua. However, the Gemara says, "Vi bailaschov shalahen Ein kan bali para min nechsei somim. If she's a creditor of the brothers, then Rabbi say this is a debt they owe her. Then that's a regular debt. Then she gets to collect from Beinonis and ultimately without a Shavua. So Rabbi say that's a pretty big nafkamina. So now we've established she's a creditor. If she's a creditor of the father, then this is a case of Nechsei Yisomim. If it's Nechsei Yisomim, then it's Ziburis with a Shavua. Rabbi say, interestingly enough, if she's a creditor of the brothers, here's what's interesting. That's not called Nechsei Yisomim, even though the brothers are the orphans, right? But nevertheless, that's not called Nechsei Yisomim because now they're the owners of the estate. So if it's a debt owed by the brothers, then what? It's Beinonis without a Shavua. Pretty incredible. So the Gemara says, "Mike, so what's the halacha?" And I will say, for her, by the way, major nafkamina. For her, ultimately, again, it will determine what type of property she gets and the manner in which she's able to obtain it. So Tashma, the Ravina Agbe Labarte de Ravashi, Mimar Bre de Ravashi, Ravina ultimately went ahead and collected property for the dowry of the daughter of Ravashi from Mar, the son of Ravashi, Bebenonis, Shalo B'Shvua, and he collected for Beinonis property and without a Shvua, which both side tells us she is the creditor of who? Creditor of who? Of the son. Of the son. Right? The creditor, or I should say of the brothers. That's really what I should call it, of the brothers. Right? She's the creditor of the brothers. Ultimately, it's the Rav Sama Brei Ravashi, Ziburis B'Shvua. And ultimately, again, from Sari Ravashi with Siburas of the Shvua. So I'll say, so if you look at Rashi says over here, it's that same Rashi Lamigba, Ravashi Mace, Umeis Rav Sama Beno B'Chayiv. Now I will say this was actually a double-edged case. This was Ravashi died and Rav Sama's son also died. That's why it becomes a little bit more complicated. Kishabasa Bitoli Para Natla Michelko Shamar Baravashi Shayakayim Beno Shelo B'Shvua Alma Balas Chov Da'achi Hava. So I will say ultimately again there was just two levels to this. There were two levels to this. Two levels is, but Lamaisa, what you see from this case over here is that halacha Lamaisa, we consider the girl to be a creditor of her, the sister to be a creditor of her brothers, and therefore she's able to go ahead and collect from Beinonis without the Shavua. So Shalach le Rab Nechemia Breid Rav Yosef le Rabba Barafuna Zuta Minarda Ki Asya Ha Isasolakamoch. When this woman comes before you, Agba Isir Nechasim, go ahead and collect for her 1/10 of the estate. In other words, give her dowry from 1/10 of the estate. Afilu mi'itztarbula or mi'itztarubla, even from the itztarubla. Now we'll say, what's itztarubla? Look at Rashi, right across from Rashi. Moshav Amos Rechayim Kimoshin Rekakai Chashav. We'll say itztarubla is the stand or the base of the mill. Now the base of the mill ultimately is considered to be karka because it's attached to the ground. So go ahead and give her 1/10 of the estate, even from the itztarubla. Amar Ravashi, ki ambina Rav Kana hab magbina afilu me'amla debesi. Ultimately, again, when we would collect the Yisr Nechasim, even from, it's actually very interesting, even from rents of a home. Let's say they owned rent yielding property. We would even collect the dowry from the rents of the home. What they're saying is like this: that since rent comes from karka, it has the status of karka as well. Interesting. So we'll say, okay, so now another story. So therefore we'll say, fine. So I just want to point out the way the Rambam paskins. So here's what we've established. We'll say this is one of these incredible Gemaras, where even though I know we're going quickly, there's a lot of information here, each and every one of these pieces is building on the next. So here's what we've established. The girl is a creditor when it comes to her nedunya, when it comes to her dowry. Therefore, again, halacha l'maisa, it's not t'nai ksuva. And therefore, what? Even if the brothers went ahead and sold off all of the property, what could she do? Claw it back. Now, I will say, what about this last piece resolution here? Whose creditor is she? Is she the father's creditor or is she the brother's creditor? What's the nafkamina? If she is the father's creditor, then what? How does she collect? Shvua and ziburis. Because again, that's called nichsei yisomim. If she is the brother's creditor, how does she collect? Beinonis shelo b'shvua. Says the Rambam. Here we go. Say these are all the same. Perek chaf hilchos ishos halacha vav. Habas be'isur zeh kebalas chov shel achin hi. She is a creditor of the brothers. Therefore, lefichach no teles osa min ha beinonis shelo b'shvua. Therefore, halacha l'maisa, she goes ahead and she collects from the Beinonis without a shvua. Now, both say this was the case. If the brothers die, here's just one more ripple, which we're just not going to get into. This was the piece that I just skipped over kind of quickly. If the brothers die, and then the brothers' children inherit the estate, then if the daughter wants to go ahead and collect her dowry, who is she collecting her dowry from? Right? Her nephews. Then that's nichsei yisomim. And how is she going to collect it? Ziburis and shvua. Okay, I'm going to give you a break on that one, right? We're going to leave that one on the side for now, right? Because that just kind of breaks the train of thought a little bit. But that's what the Gemara brought up in that last case over there. Fine. So I'm going to say, let's go weiter. Let's kind of keep our train of thought. Here we go. Great case. Shalach le Rav Anan Rav Huna. Listen to this. We'll say Rav Anan sent a letter to Rav Huna. Here's how it went. Huna chavrin. Huna, my friend. Shalom aleichem. Ki asya ha'eses alakamach. When a certain woman comes before you, agba isr nechase. Make sure to go ahead and give her 1/10 of the estate, ultimately for her dowry. Okay, fine. Seems pretty straightforward. So we'll say. So now watch this. Havayasiv Rav Sheshes Kame. So Rav Sheshes was sitting by Rav Huna. And what happened? Rav Huna got upset. Why was Rav Huna upset? Rav Huna was taken aback about the way that Rav Anan addressed him. Right? Rav Huna was a more senior person, and Rav Anan, he took liberties. Huna, Chavrin, Huna, my friend. So Rav Huna was very taken aback. He says to Rav Sheshes, so Amrlei, Zil Emalei. So listen to this, Rav Huna. So Rav Huna says to Rav Sheshes, go and give the following message to Rav Huna. Right? To Rav Anan. And you better deliver the message exactly as I'm saying it. And if you don't say it the way that I'm giving it over to you, I'm excommunicating you. Ubishamta yeheiman delo amrlei. Anan. Give him back the following message. Anan. Right? He refers to him the same way that Rav Anan referred to Anan. Mi mekarkai o mi metaltalei. Tell me, should we give her the property should we give her the dowry from karka, from metaltalin? Uman Yosef Bey Marzicha. And who sits at the head of the Marzicha? Azar Rav Sheshes L'Kamed Rabbanan. So Rav Sheshes comes, he delivers the message to Rabbanan. Amar Le Mar Rabba V'Ravuna Rabba. So Amar Le Mar Rabba V'Ravuna Rabbe Dirabba V'Shamute Shamis Mandalo Amar Le. So ultimately, again, so we'll say Rav Sheshes was a little bit apologetic, because Rav Sheshes felt very, very, that it was inappropriate for him to deliver a message like this. So he comes before Rav Anan, Amrlei, Ma Rabba, you are my Rebbe, Rav Huna Rabbe Drabba, and Rav Huna is your Rebbe. So he was saying, Rav Huna is a little bit upset about the way that you addressed him. Right? And the only reason I'm saying your name, Anan, is because this is how Rav Huna said, if I don't, he's going to excommunicate me. V'lav dishamute, and were it not for the fact that he was going to go ahead and excommunicate me, lo havaka imna anan mikar mital. I would never have addressed the question to you like this. Anan from karka, from metaltalin. Uman yosef beimer zachya bereisha. Okay, so Amar le Rav Anan le kamid Ramoka. So therefore, both say, here's what's interesting. So we've got a lot of machlokes and no resolution, right? So again, remember, so now we have this little bit of this feud between Rav Sheshes and Rav Anan. So listen to this. Amar le Rav Anan le kamid Ramoka. So both say, get ready for this. So what does Rav Anan do? He goes to Mar Ukva. He says to Mar Ukva, Amar le. Do you see the way Rav Huna is talking to me? He calls me Anan. Right? He calls you Anan. So the Gemara says, so he calls you Anan. Va'od marzicha deshalachli lo yadanamayni. Furthermore, he asks me this question about who sits at the head of the marzicha. What's a marzicha? So I'll say, before we go on, I just want to point out something absolutely amazing. You see what's happening over here? Rav Anan writes a letter to Rav Huna. He says, Huna chavrin, Huna, my friend. Rav Huna gets the question, gets the letter, and what does he do? He brings in Rav Sheshes. So Rav Sheshes, can you believe the way Rav Anan spoke to me? Sends him back with this whole message. What happens? So Rav Anan gets the message back. Anan. He goes to Mar Ukva. Can you believe how Rav Huna is speaking about me? We'll say, what's incredibly. So now what happens? Rav Huna is angry. Rav Sheshes is angry. I'm sorry. Rav Huna is angry. Rav Anan's angry, right? They're both offended. And I both say, so Rav Huna's speaking to Rav Sheshes, Rav Anan speaking to Mar Ukva. What's the only thing missing from this? Right? They're not talking to each other. See, I both saying, that's the most haskell in Gemaras like this. That sometimes like there's conflict. It's conflict, right? I'm angry at Ruvain's angry at me. So what happens? I'm going to speak about this situation to everyone. To everyone. Ruvain's going to speak about this situation to everyone. Only one little thing missing. I never go to Ruvain, and Ruvain never comes here. I both say, Maisim b'chol yom. Maisim b'chol yom. So what ends up happening? I've got my camp riling them up against Ruvain. Ruvain gets his camp riling them up against me. And if, again, Ruvain, you're angry at me? Come and talk to me. Right? Don't be passive aggressive. Don't do this. Don't do that. Just if there's a problem and you're angry, just come and talk to me. And I will say, but when we don't talk to each other, for some reason, it's just a fascinating human dynamic. I'm angry. I'm upset. You did something. I will do everything except confront, right? Everything except talk to the person I'm angry at. And instead, this whole dynamic builds up. And I will say, you know what happens? Because we've all been involved in dynamics like this. Ultimately, the dynamic becomes so colossal that people just perpetuate this. It just remains like this. So people remain distant and angry at each other for prolonged amounts of time. And ultimately, it just stays like that. When so tragically could have just been dealt with had people just if you're angry, so confront the person you're angry with. Say, Plony, I'm angry with you. Okay. We've all had conversations like that. Not pleasant. But okay, you're angry. Tell me why. Let's see if we could resolve it. Maybe we can, maybe we can't. But at least we could acknowledge, at least we could deal with it with each other. So incredible. So what's what happens? So now Rav Anan is taking this to Mar Ukva. So Amrle, Amrle, easy gufa uvda heichi hava. So Mar Ukva says, okay, let's take a deep breath. Why don't you tell me what happened, right? Rav Anan, let's start from the top. Right? How did all this go down? So Amrle, hachi v'hachi hava ma'isa. So he said to him again, here's how everything unfolded. Amrle gavra de lo yoda ma'niyu marzicha shalach le Rav Huna chavin. I will say this is why in life you have to have good friends. Because what does Mar Ukva say to Rav Anan? Rav Anan, a guy who doesn't know what a marzicha is, you should not be calling Rav Huna by his first name. Rav Huna is not your buddy, right? If you don't know what a marzicha is, because also remember again, in the letter, or it wasn't a letter, it was a message back to Rav Anan with Rav Sheshes, and I will say this was Rav Huna shtach. Rav Huna says back to Rav Anan, by the way, who sits at the head of the marzicha? So you have to imagine the scene. So Rav Anan walks into Mar Ukva and he's all up in arms. Can you believe it? Huna says to me, calls me Anan. And then he has the chutzpah to ask me, who sits at the head of a marzicha? By the way, what's a marzicha? Rav says, listen, buddy, that's not a direct quote. If you don't know what a marzicha is, you probably shouldn't be calling Rav Huna by his first name. I will say, that's a chaver. So Mar Ukva was a friend, and what does he do? He calls out Rav Anan. You made the mistake. You should not be calling Rav Huna, Huna, my buddy. Right? Huna, my chaver. Huna is not your chaver. Right? Rav Huna is one of the Gdolei Adar. And obviously he's a great Talmid Chacham than you are. Don't speak to him in familiar ways. Right? You made a mistake here. So by the way, the Gemara says, okay, got it. My marzicha. Says the Gemara, what is a marzicha? Right? So what is that? So the Gemara says, marzicha is an avel. Marzicha is a mourner. So listen to this. Dechsiv, Ko amar Hashem, al tavo beis marzach. Do not come to the house of mourning. So Rabbi Avo. So we'll say, so what does it mean? So okay. So we'll say, so let's take a step back. Okay. So now we hopefully diffuse the situation. We'll say, what's missing from this exchange? What's missing? What's missing? What happened next? What happened next? Right. So we'll say, so did Ravanan go back? Did Ravanan not go back? Was Rav Huna Makab? Who knows? Who knows? Which I was saying is the way so many stories of conflict end without resolution. And it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be. We all have pockets of conflict in life. So it doesn't have to be without resolution. But so many times in life, it does end with it. It ends out resolution and just it lingers. It lingers. So did they reconcile? Did they not reconcile? The Gemara moves on. Am Rabbi Avo. How do I know that the Avel sits at the head of the table? I will say when people come to be Menachim Avel, right? That the Avel sits at the head. How do we know that? Shneimar Evchar Darkam ve'eshev rosh ve'eshkon kemelech begdud kashavelim Yinachim. So we'll say Yinachim. When it says Yinachim, Achir Mashal sounds like others are comforting. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Yinucham Ksiv. Okay, Mar Zutra Amar Mehacha v'Sar Marzach Seruchim, which literally means ultimately, again, excessive mourning is coming their way. Mar v'zach na'aseh sar l'sruchim. The one who is mar and zach. Both say mar means bitter, zach means detached, ultimately becomes the head. Amar Rav Hilchos. So both say. So that just means, by the way, that when an avel is being comforted, right? When people come to visit the avel sits at the head, which is an interesting dynamic by itself. Here the avel is suffering, but yet he is given a prominent place among those who come to comfort him. Okay, Amar Rava says, Hilchasa mimikarkai v'lo mimetaltali, bein lemazone, bein leksuva, bein leparnasso. And Rava says, the halacha l'maisa is, so now we're looping back. So so what we've established is that legabe dowry, the girl is a creditor. It's not Tanai Ksuva. She only collects from Karka, and ultimately she is a creditor of the brothers. The Gemara just ends off by saying, by the way, it's not just for dowry. Ultimately, again, it's Mizonos, Ksuva, and dowry. All of these items are only collected from Karka, not collected from Metaltlin. Beautiful. Both says go a little bit weiter. Mishnah. Hamash l'shmos lebito. An interesting case. Let's say a man goes ahead and gives into the hands of a shaliach. So both say this is a case. If you look at Rashi, Hamash l'mos lebito. Masar maos biad shlish l'tzorach bito liknos sada o neduyin chushitinasei. So both say Ruvain gives over money in the hands of a shaliach to go ahead and purchase a field or give dowry to his daughter when his daughter gets married. So according to Rashi, this is a case, right? So the father gives over money in the hands of a shaliach. So says the Mishnah, V'hi neman bali alai. So we'll say, so now what happened? She says, you know what? Give the money to she gets married. So she says, give the money to my husband. I trust my husband to take care of the money for me, to purchase what needs to be purchased, whatever has to. So what's the halacha? Yasa shlish mashu hushlosh b'yov the Rebbe Meir. Rebbe Meir says, still, the shaliach should not do that. Rather, the shaliach was entrusted with a particular agency, and he should execute the agency as tasked. He should purchase the property on behalf of the girl, give it to the girl as her dowry, right, as her parnasso, and not give it over to the hands of the husband. Rabbi Yossi says, I don't understand. So therefore, I will say, Rabbi Yossi says, just give the husband the money, because anyway, what's going to happen? She gets right. The shaliach purchases the field, gives her the field. She could turn around and what? Sell the field and give her husband the money anyway. So in other words, what she wants to happen is going to happen regardless. So therefore, just give her husband the money in accordance with her wishes. So when is this true? This is true with an adult, with a gedola. Aval b'ketana ein maseh ketana klum. So we'll say, even if according to Rabbi Yossi says, when do we listen to the girl to ultimately give it over to her husband? That's only in a situation where halacha l'maisa she's an adult. But if she is a ketana, then ultimately we keep the money in the hands of the shaliach because the actions of a ketana are halachically not binding. So we'll stop over here with the Gemara. We'll pick up with this Gemara tomorrow. Shkoyach. Hey, Jack, good to see you.